All right, folks. Hi. Good afternoon. Using a new webcam and same old mic. So hopefully the picture's a little better this time around than normal, but we'll see. You can see my light in the background from where I shoot these episodes. In fact, you can see all kinds of stuff in the background from where I shoot these episodes. So hi, folks. Welcome to another Esoterica Live, where we can do some questions and answers. We can talk about the past couple of episodes. We've been looking at the past 3 episodes have been a lot of fun. I have to say, especially the one on the Derveni Papyrus, which I just find the Derveni Papyrus to be enormously fascinating, and I kind of have a show and tell object here that I'll bring up here in just a minute. So yeah, and there's all some awesome people in the chat, some Patreon supporters. Yeah, it's so wonderful to have you guys here. But like I said, it's been a really fun past 3 weeks here at Esoterica. I got to handle the Derveni Papyrus, which is just without a doubt one of my most favorite documents. My most favorite documents in history. Yeah, Trend, the sunlight. I should close those curtains, shouldn't I? So I'll close those next time. Again, learning as you go, folks. I'm kind of making all this stuff up as I go. Well, not the content, just the doing of these videos. So in a lot of ways, I'm absolutely a complete amateur when it comes to like live streaming and all this social media stuff. So I'm definitely figuring all that out as I go. But like I said, the Derveni Papyrus, which was remains, I think, one of the most important things that has been discovered probably in the past 100 years. It's amazing that it doesn't get much press. It shocks me because Nag Hammadi gets a lot of press because of the discovery of the Gnosticism stuff, and obviously the Dead Sea Scrolls gets a lot of press. But when I talk about the Derveni Papyrus, most people have never heard of it. And I'm talking about even people who do classics and even people who work in ancient philosophy. I think I brought it up to one of my classical philosophy professors in graduate school, and he was like, "I've never heard of this papyrus. What is this?" So it's interesting. It's interesting. I think it's just super fascinating that this document exists, and we can do the work of trying to decipher just what it means. So yeah, with the Derveni Papyrus, that was a lot of fun to do that episode. And on top of this, we have this new episode that's just out today on Israelite Demonology, which is a bit of a complicated thing, right? So I try not to engage in much in the way of clickbait because technically the word demon doesn't really apply to ancient Israel. Obviously, what's going on there is a incredibly complicated business, and so it's a little anachronistic, but I think it's really interesting for folks, especially folks who are interested in the history of demonology or in the history of these kinds of beings, especially folks who are ceremonial ritual practitioners who are interested in things like the Goetia and various kinds of things like that. Learning that these entities developed over time, that the conception of these entities, the idea of these entities really dramatically changed over time. And so rewinding all the way back to the world of ancient Israel or just ancient Egypt or even ancient Europe, that the world of these demons, is a very, I think it's a very interesting world because it's very dynamic, and what exactly these creatures are changes over time. So I see some questions here. Have I read the Urantia book before? I have not. It's on the list of these giant books, these giant channeled books that I want to read at some point. The Urantia book, the Ohaspe, which I have down here, some of Blavatsky's stuff, and some other of these channeled books. The Martian book that was channeled in the 19th century as well. There's a whole collection of these, including some books in the Mormon tradition that have been channeled. And eventually, what I want to do is start doing episodes on those books. It's just that some of them are so massive. That actually doing one of those books, just reading one of those books takes so much time, much less trying to make it into an episode. But I do want to get into reading those books, and I do want to take a look at them. So, so super interesting and super interesting books. So let's see what else we have here. Questions wise. Does my beard catch fire when I read with the candlelight? No, I clip my beard, right? So folks know this, right? So you take your beard. If you're reading by candlelight, you take your beard, you move it to the side, you clip it to your sideburns, and you're perfectly safe. So yeah, we have all kinds of we have all kinds of ways of protecting our beard. It's very important to protect our beard. The idea of it catching fire, don't want to do that. So lots of ways of making sure our beards are safe. What else have I read? The Kabbalah Isaac Meyer, or I haven't. This name sounds familiar. I haven't. Isaac Meyer. It sounds familiar. This is like an older book, I think. I don't know. I'll have to take a look at that later. I'm not sure. I think it's one of these books from like the early 20th century. You can buy it in reprint. I think is that the book you're thinking about, the Kabbalah by Isaac Meyer. If it is, I think I have it. I think I've read it way back in the day, but nothing is immediately jumping to mind specifically about it. But it's one of those books that I think popularized Kabbalistic ideas in the early 20th century, and or maybe late 19th century. And so I have to take a look at it. Let's see here. Other questions. And like I said, I have a fun Q&A thing, or not Q&A. I have a fun show and tell thing to do here in just a second about the Derveni Papyrus, because I can't not do weird experiments in my house because, I mean, do I look like the kind of guy that would do a weird experiment? Yes, I'm that guy. So I'll do that show and tell here in a moment. I just want to get some of these other questions. More videos on Christian mysticism. Yeah, I will eventually get around to them. I'm actually just starting a research project on the Cathars, which is the Cathars and the Brethren of the Free Spirit. So I really want to do some episodes on the Cathars, especially the debate around whether there even were Cathars, which is a really interesting debate. So those, and definitely want to do something perhaps on Meister Eckhart, Julian Norwich, and other Christian mystics as well. Also Origen. Origen is a character who I'm really interested in. In fact, within arm's reach of me, right, is the new translation of Origen's On First Principles, which Origen, as you may know, was an early Christian theologian who was eventually condemned in the 5th century, I think. At least Origenism was condemned. So I really want to look at sort of heterodox Christianities and how they developed. I find that stuff super interesting. Let's see here. Wow, this Hildegard of Bingen also. Although I will say that I've done an episode on Hildegard of Bingen's Lingua Ignota, and but looking at Hildegard's actual mystical texts, that's something I want to look at as well. Although I will say that reading the Scivias, Hildegard's principle text, is a slog. Man, it's a slog. It is a difficult read. It's really takes a lot of work. But yeah, I think I definitely want to get into hers. And Philip also. Philip over at Let's Talk Religion, a good friend of mine and colleague, recently did an episode on Marguerite Perret, and I really find The Mirror of Simple Souls to be an amazing text. Although I'd also want to get to Heidevich, who is, I think, as folks know, my absolute favorite Christian mystic. I would trade all kinds of stuff for some Heidevich. I really find her to be absolutely incredible. I will do an episode on the Rosicrucian Manifestos. Absolutely. In fact, they're sitting right over there. And so, yeah, absolutely. We're going to get to the Rosicrucian Manifestos. That is definitely going to happen. They're super interesting. Also want to do an episode on the Illuminati, because I think the Illuminati is one of these like poorly understood organizations that has got all these conspiracy theories attached to it now. And so also, I think doing one on the Illuminati will be something I'll do in the future as well. All right. Have I had the chance to take out Tasmanian Aboriginal petroglyphs? Yeah, I don't know. I haven't. No, I don't know much about Aboriginal religion, aside from the stuff I think a lot of people know about, like the Dreamtime and things like that. But Aboriginal religion is something I don't know a lot about and would like to know more about. In fact, Indigenous religion in general is one of the things I'm really interested in learning more about, just in general, because I think it's one of these underappreciated things, especially by sort of Euro-American scholars. And obviously this is an incredibly important topic. So something I'm really interested in, something I'm really fascinated by. Is there a decent length book of the Sefer Zohar available? Yeah, you can read I think the entire Sefer Zohar is available on Sefaria. And obviously the Pritzker edition is the best translation into English, but there's a couple different Hebrew editions, Aramaic editions, Hebrew editions I could recommend as well. So yeah, Zohar's pretty widely available. Although I will say that the quality of the translations varies a lot. Let's see. What do I think of Mormonism? I think Mormonism is really interesting. I think I often meet Christians who are interested in sort of esotericism. And my knee-jerk response, I guess, inside my mind is always like, why not be Mormon? It's like the most esoteric form of Christianity in some ways. It has channeling, and there's occult stuff, and there's kind of freemasonry kind of in there. And there's this priesthood business, and there's all this, there's all this interesting stuff about Mormonism that dovetails nicely with a lot of esoteric stuff. And so I really appreciate the more esoteric aspects of Mormonism. I think eventually I'll do an episode on some of the early texts, especially some of the channeled texts, including the Book of Mormon, by the way, which I find really, really fascinating. So really, really fascinating. Let's see. No, right. And also, that's always the interesting stuff about Mormonism. There's also dreadful things about Mormonism as well. It's like every religion. There's all kinds of dreadful things about Mormonism as well. It's true of Judaism and everything else. So let's see. Shabbatites, V teachings, and followers of Illuminati connection? No. The Illuminati were basically a secular society that pushed Enlightenment values, folks. There's a bunch of German dudes with like George Washington wigs sitting around talking about emancipation and liberalism and stuff like that. There's basically, I think, very little evidence to tie the Illuminati as a secret society to anything, even actually a cult, really. They're basically like, we're only Lockean liberals inside of Germany. And so I think what's interesting is that what was esoteric about their beliefs was political liberalism when they were living inside of an absolutist state. And so it's fascinating that part of what also is true about Freemasonry in this country is that a lot of what got pushed in Freemasonry wasn't esoteric stuff, or at least if it was esoteric stuff, it was esoteric liberalism. And so I find the idea that what's esoteric and what's exoteric can shift rapidly in terms of what needs to be hidden. And so I find that what's really fascinating about those organizations is that their esoteric teachings were things like rights and voting and human emancipation, things like that. So I find that's what's interesting about those groups. Do I have a sister? No, I do not have a sister sledge, unfortunately. A spiritual sister sledge, but I have a brother. I have a brother who's awesome. Love my brother. Let's see here. Yeah, I would love to collaborate on some Mormonism stuff. If folks are interested in that stuff, I would love. I have some books over here about the LDS Church and stuff like that, and I'd love to get more into that stuff. I think there's a cool podcast. Someone reached out to me several months ago about maybe being on, so maybe that will become a thing more. Yeah, Jenny, what text can we look at into the history of the Nephilim and their origins? The big place to look is in at least primary sources is to look in the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, which deals a little bit with the Nephilim. I wonder what the main academic text for the study of the Nephilim is. I have to look that up. It's one of these things that I think is really popular in sort of the zeitgeist of the occult world at some level with the Nephilim business, but I've never personally been terribly fascinated by them. And so I need to do some more work. So I will dig up a text on the Nephilim. What is the standard academic study of them? And eventually do an episode on them, because people just find them endlessly fascinating. And I'll definitely take a look at the history of Mormonism. David Alonzo, thank you so much, brother, for the donation to the channel. I am absolutely interested in doing some in-person lectures. In fact, I think I've said this on a previous live stream, that what I really would like to do, and again, it all depends on what's possible in terms of you guys, basically, folks in the real world, is I'd like to do things like weekend seminars where I would come to a place, a specific region, One of those areas that really jumps to mind is maybe the New York area or the Pacific Northwest, and then do basically a long form seminar Friday, Saturday night. And then, so it would be basically a long form thing where we would have some classes, there'd be reading material, and it would be just sort of a long form study of something that would be seminar styled. So that's something I'm really interested in, and I'm thinking about the Pacific Northwest as a potential place to do that, and maybe the New York area, maybe the Boston area, because I know people there. So it's totally up to what's possible. I'm going to pitch it eventually and see, insofar as, I can get airfare and room and board and, the basic stuff I would need. But I really, really would love to be able to travel places and study with you guys in person, look at text in person, look at them in the original languages, and really get into them. Because while it's fun to do these half-hour YouTube lectures, I find that learning in person would be really great. Yeah, Philly would also be really accessible, Alicia. I have family in Philly, so yeah, that's another area. So it all depends. It all depends on, Texas. My brother lives in Houston. I think the Austin area would be great. So I really like the idea of sort of Esoterica weekend seminars. And that's really all about what's possible in terms of me getting to that place, me having a place to stay, maybe getting a little bit of money for the time I would have to spend there, stuff like that. So I'm super interested in that. And if you guys are interested in that, then I'm absolutely willing to try to do what I can to make it possible. And, spending a weekend learning with you all, with folks, would be awesome. And I would really try to do, really throw my best at it, and learn together would be just fine. I would love that. So yes, something to look forward to, because I really think of Esoterica as the platform, as I really wanted to see it go well beyond YouTube. YouTube is great, but I really do think that in-person learning with a book in your hand, with a pad, a pencil and paper, with a group of people with a lot of different opinions, thinking through some of these really difficult texts, I really think that's the ideal way to learn, right? Studying a text in person over the course of several hours, really working through it. I think that that's the best way to learn. And while I think that Esoterica as a YouTube platform is great, I think it's really limited in that way. And also, I think learning together, me learning with y'all and y'all learning with me, is a far better way of doing education than you learning from me. Because I don't want to be thought of, and I'm not, the sort of the final arbiter of what's true about this material. And I really do my best to present the material in all of its complexity, because it is incredibly complex. But I'm still doing that from my perspective, and there's still a one-way kind of situation where I'm providing the information to you. And I really would much prefer, and I think it'd be much better, that it would be a conversation that we're having and we're learning together in what in Hebrew is called chavrusa, and in a friendship style, and a debate style, and a conversational style way. I just find that to be a much more exciting idea. And insofar as I can make that happen, or we can make that happen, the Esoterica community, I guess, I'm excited for that to be a possibility. All right, let me see. I've rambled on there for a little while. Let me grab some questions, because I saw some folks. Have I read the Aramaic Palestinian targums? Yes, yeah. The targums are. I mean, some of the targums are printed with Torahs and onkelos and things like that. I mean, onkelos is printed right there with the text. So yeah, I think that what's interesting about the Targumim and onkelos is that you get a glimpse into how people at the time read those texts. Same with Septuagint. And so, yeah, I like to read the Hebrew Bible. Anytime I'm studying Hebrew Bible, I'm almost always studying it, trying to study it along with those really early translations. Let's see. George Peter believed that if you wanted to perform the rituals that you study, would you get any results? I guess it depends on what you mean by results, right? I'm pretty skeptical of a lot of this stuff, but I think that there are two ways of thinking about results. One way of thinking about them is psychological results. And to me, that seems like a really settled question. There's no doubt about the fact that people who practice various forms of esoteric spiritualities, whether it's ceremonial magic or witchcraft or whatever, it's clear that those folks that practice those techniques have significant changes in their psychology, often for the better, sometimes for the worse. That's true of any religion, I guess. So in terms of psychological results, there's no doubt to me about that. Now, am I going to commit myself to the possibility of something like supernatural causation? I'm pretty slow to go there, frankly. I'm pretty slow to go there, but I'm definitely interested in thinking through that further. But yeah, at least in terms of psychology and in terms of spiritual development and psychological development, yeah, I think there's no doubt that these practices yield results. Seems pretty clear to me. All right, folks, let me see some other questions. Let's see. All right. Well, we have Ludwig Wittgenstein in the room. I was just reading the Tractatus earlier today, which I really think is a kind of mystical text, actually. The Beta Israel, yeah, I don't know exactly what I think about. I mean, the Beta Israel is super interesting. The Orthodox Ethiopians are just a super fascinating church in general, fascinating society. It's just interesting in terms of Judaism, how Judaism kind of got marooned in so many places, with various kinds of Judaisms developing over time, whether it be the Beta Israel or the Kaifeng Jews, or even Jews in Rome that have their own specific minhag or whatever. Yeah, I think that they're super fascinating, and the fact that they preserved so much scripture is something that we have to be internally thankful for. We would not have a copy, basically, of the Book of Enoch were it not for the Ethiopian church. So I think it's super important to recognize the importance of the Ethiopian church and the scholarship that they did, whether it's the Kebra Nagast and other texts, but also preserving and copying these incredibly important documents. I'm infinitely in gratitude for the Ethiopian church and what they've been able to preserve and continue to preserve to this day. So I'm absolutely thankful for that, for them. Let's see. Did I make my video intro? So I didn't. I did not make my video intro. I consulted with a friend of mine who actually I bought my camera and all the lighting equipment that I use. He's a friend of the family, a friend of mine, and he works in a production company. And I was like, hey, can we work together to make a little short intro video for the channel? And he agreed. And so he came over and we just got a bunch of my weird stuff that I have and sort of filmed it and did some things. And I got a section from one of the Nocturnes, and that ended up being kind of the theme song. And there it goes. I think eventually I want to make another similar style intro with the same music, but maybe different artifacts that I have, and make a slightly different one. So maybe that's coming in the future, but I don't know. Wow, so much. Wow, so much stuff. Let's see here. A lot of folks are pro doing in-person learning. Absolutely, me too. KT, yeah, question. What did you start in this field? What drew me in? I can tell you, because I'm making an episode about it. I just finished writing it today. And for folks who would recognize this big book, right? These are the 2-volume collected texts of the Spirit Diaries of Dr. John Dee and Edward Kelly. That is what got me into esotericism, folks. I remember being a teenager, looking at these esoteric texts, these books, and thinking, wow, these guys are talking in an angelic language, and if there's an angelic language, there might be something out there. And so next week's episode is going to be the first of a 3-part series on Enochian, on the Enochian language. And so I'll be covering the Enochian alphabet next week. After that, I'll be doing the Liber Loga, and I will, after that, be doing the angelic calls and sort of the more recent reception of the Enochian language. So yeah, next week we'll start a 3-part series on Enochiana. And I've been corresponding a little bit with Frater Aaron Leach, who's just a really amazing occultist or ritual practitioner. And yeah, he and I have been going back and forth a little bit. And so we're going to be looking at the Enochian stuff and I've been looking at some of his books, which are just fabulous. So yeah, starting next week, Enochian stuff. So that's what got me into it, was the Enochian stuff. And after that, I just sort of went down the rabbit hole, and now I'm on the internet teaching other people how to go down the rabbit hole, I guess, for better or worse. So Enochiana is really what lured me in. Although I was really interested even as a kid in like Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World and In Search Of, and these sort of channels about weird stuff like, I don't know, the Bermuda Triangle and ghosts and things like this. So yeah, so that's what, that's kind of what drove me in. And next week, absolutely going to be looking at some Enochian stuff. In fact, I finished the script today for that episode. It's going to be long. I think it's going to be maybe 45 minutes long, because I really want to do a deep dive into some of this Enochian stuff, which I find endlessly fascinating. Have I ever tried Jade 1901 Absinthe? Yeah, I have. In fact, I designed the first label for it, if you believe that. In fact, all of the original labels for the Jade Absinthe, I designed those labels based on old vintage labels. In fact, I have my original label up there on my shelf. So yes, I have tried Jade 1901. Ted Bro makes, in my opinion, some of the best, maybe the best absinthe in the world. And if you've not tried it and you like absinthe, you absolutely have to try some of Ted's absinthe. Where can you get a facsimile of the Leningrad Codex? You can buy one. They are in print. They're super expensive. I think the facsimile costs like $400, but you can get one. So yeah, you can get one of the Leningrad Codex. I'm pretty sure it's all online too. So pretty sure it's all online. All right, James. Yeah, James McClure, thank you so much for your donation to the channel, brother. Yeah, we all find our way into esotericism in lots of different ways, but Joseph Campbell and episodes of Monty Python are an excellent way. So yeah, I appreciate you hanging around, being in the live stream today, supporting the channel, man. Thank you so much. But yeah, in fact, you mentioned comic books. There is an author whose name is slipping my mind now. I think he's in Texas, but he writes about the intersection of esotericism and comic books. Which is a really interesting, again, we often think of comic books or other kinds of media like video games or whatever as being sort of lowbrow, but absolutely video games and comic books are one of the mechanisms by which esoteric ideas get transferred into now. And the amount of people that I think find some of my episodes from, like, for instance, on the Lesser Key of Solomon, they're coming from video games. They're seeing these goetic seals in video games and they're curious about them. And so absolutely, I think that, these video games and comic books are an important way in which esotericism both survives, but also maintains its relevance in the contemporary world, and television and things like this. Again, I think about another place where I got really interested in esotericism was watching The Craft when it came out in theaters. I remember watching it in like May of '97 or something like that, and just being blown away by how cool the women in The Craft seemed. And this story was so compelling, and I was like, I want to research witchcraft and what was witchcraft really like, and what are witches like now? Like, they're out there. Like, what are they doing? I want to learn more about them. And so I picked up some books and talked to some local Wiccans, and it was really interesting. And that's another place where I got into thinking about esotericism, both as a lived practice, but also as a thing to study. Peter Deutsch, thank you so much also for your contribution. Do I enjoy Iron Maiden? Yes, I'm a fan of heavy metal music in general. I think I've said this before. One of the things I really like is I like black metal. I was just listening to the new Panopticon record, which dropped today. I don't know if you guys, any black metal fans in the room or metal fans in the room, but Panopticon just dropped a new record, and I really love Austin Lund. I think he is a musical genius. So, but yeah, I love heavy metal music. Not so much thrash, but some shoegaze, black metal, certain kinds of black metal. But yeah, I love black metal. In fact, I'm wearing underneath this outfit. You probably can't see it, but I'm wearing a Crowley shirt. Yeah, so I'm wearing a Crowley shirt underneath here. In fact, I thought about just wearing the Crowley shirt and not the whole get up, but Yeah, I have not heard the new Wolves in the Throne Room track, but that is what I'm doing absolutely right after I get off this live stream. Wolves in the Throne Room is awesome, and they also make some of the best black metal, in my opinion. Yeah, so yeah, love black metal. Like, I think I wrote my dissertation listening to like Death Heaven and Wolves in the Throne Room and Krallis and stuff like that. So my entire dissertation was basically written to the tune of for 100 hours. Makes for good inspiration. Let's see some other questions. I've never watched Neon Genesis Evangelion. I would like to watch it, and also Full Metal Alchemy. Then there's a whole world of like really cool anime esotericism that I don't know much about, and I'd like to know more about. Again, this is a really important place in which, again, anime has preserved some of this stuff, and it's an important, way of thinking about these anime movies as a kind of esoteric text. And seeing how art and artists and animators take these old documents and make them live again, and new kinds of mythologies and new kinds of ideas, which is always what this material has done. It's always survived because people have reinvented it somehow, reconstructed it somehow. And the fact that they've done that in anime, or video games for that matter, is, to me, I think, one, eminently worthy of study, academically and otherwise, but also just super fascinating. Super, super fascinating. Yeah, The Craft, man, I love The Craft. That thing, and also the soundtrack. The soundtrack of The Craft was a thing that I absolutely listened to tons and tons and tons of times. So, yeah. All right, Adrian. Yeah, thank you for being such a big supporter of the channel, and thank you for this donation. Yeah, actually, this whole question about psychedelics is something I really do want to do an episode on. Because several reasons. Several reasons. One reason is this. There's this sort of anti-psychedelic bias just in academia. It just exists. It comes from this super like square, boring attitude that drugs are bad, man, and you shouldn't do drugs, and Nancy Reagan nonsense that somehow managed to make its way into academia, where academia should be open-minded about all this stuff. For whatever reason, they just super stupid about that. And it's clear to me that psychedelic drugs have played some important role in the history of religion generally, but esotericism specifically. And it seems possible, likely even, that that various kinds of psychoactive drugs, whether everything from caffeine to alcohol to psychedelic drugs like you would find in mushrooms and things like that, have clearly played some role in things like perhaps the Elysian mysteries, and other kinds of things. Now, I don't want to overplay the hand where I joke that, there's always someone in the comments that says, yeah, it's just about DMT or something. I don't want to overplay the hand, but I absolutely want to explore what kind of evidence do we really have, and what do the arguments look like that cannabism really is cannabis, or that we have evidence of mushroom use, right? Or and I did an episode on Giovanni della Porta's natural magic, where he actually gives clear recipes for how to induce hallucinogenic states, or dissociative states probably, in his text. And that's probably the most famous book on natural magic ever written. So it's clear they're there. Now the question is collating them somehow and putting them together in a way that doesn't overplay the hand, because I don't want to say, well, everything that's esoteric is just, drugs or whatever. I don't think that's true. But because there's been this persistent anti-psychedelic bias all the way through academia up till now, scholars have just been unwilling or unable or whatever to look at this data. And I think that there's that these things have been they're crucially important. So absolutely, it's something that I want to take a look at in a future episode. And also the early sort of influences on Christianity, Adrian, you're absolutely right. It's really clear that Christianity was informed by was informed by the world around it, because every religion is. There's this weird idea that religions form in a vacuum, and they're like pure in the beginning, and there are no foreign influences in the beginning, and then they get degraded over time. Every religion is the result of syncretism. Why people find that difficult to swallow boggles my mind, but every religion is in its foundation syncretistic. So it's unsurprising that we're going to find especially Orphic looking stuff in early Christianity. The most famous example, of course, is the Orphic, the little seal of Orpheus, where it shows a crucified person, right? And it says Orpheus above it. It's clear there's some kind of syncretistic Christian Orphic stuff going on there. And so it's unsurprising to me that early Christianity is being influenced by this stuff. Mystery religions and other kinds of things, right? With baptism and stuff like that. So absolutely. Yeah, I think this is absolutely a topic that needs to be explored more. But again, like, I don't like to overplay the hand, because some people say, well, oh, there's no such thing as Jesus wasn't really real, and it was just actually, I don't know, Serapis, or that Christianity really is just sort of warmed up Mithraism. And that's not true either. That's these reductionistic things that say something very complex is just one thing. It's just Mithraism, or it's just Orphism, or it's just like blah, 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 blah. None of that can be true, because human beings aren't simple, and human cultures aren't simple, and human religious beliefs are damn sure not simple. And so what we have to do is look for the mess. And frankly, the more messy the story, the more likely I think it's like to be true. And so when I look at authors who give me stories about how early Christianity began or how Judaism began, when they say we don't know and it looks real messy, I'm much more interested in what they have to say and much more willing to trust them than someone who says, oh, it's just like mushrooms and Mithraism. It's not that simple. It's no way it's that simple, because human beings aren't that simple. Yep. Yeah, human beings just aren't. You ever dated people? They're crazy. Everyone is crazy. So it's not surprising that crazy people believe in crazy stuff would be real complex. So these kinds of stuff. All right, let me scroll back up. I'm going on these rants, and I got to make sure that try to get as many questions as I can. Also, just happens to be the case that I think there's anti-psychedelic bias, because a lot of these guys have tried psychedelics. They realize how powerful they are, and they want to keep the lid on it, basically. And so I just find it silly that this bias exists and things like that. Let's see. Do quantum mechanics and esotericism overlap? I don't know. I don't understand quantum mechanics enough to say. I always say that if you don't understand the math behind quantum mechanics, then you don't know anything about quantum mechanics. So if you can't do the math, you don't know what quantum mechanics is. There's no amount of cats and boxes and those kinds of things makes you experience with quantum mechanics. And often I find that if you can't do the math, you don't know what it is. And I don't know the math. So let's see. Have I read Hegel in the Hermetic tradition? Yes, it's a great book. I think that McGee maybe overplays his hand a little bit, because I don't think there is a Hermetic tradition to speak of at that time. There probably is kind of one now, but I don't think there was in the 19th century. And so I don't like that title, and often authors don't pick those titles anyway. So I think he's a little more Yeatsian than I would like. But there's absolutely, to my mind, no doubt that he's right in the overall project. That is to say that Hegel is deeply influenced by thinkers that we would now identify as folks in the Western esoteric world, Jakob Böhme and people like that, Oettinger especially. So yeah, there's definitely the case that I think McGee's book is generally right. I'll be doing an episode about it. And I think that definitely it's the case that Hegel is incorporating a lot of esotericism into his philosophy. His lectures on Kabbalah and stuff are super fascinating and pretty accessible. I don't think he understands Kabbalah, but whatever. Can't blame Hegel. All right. Let's see. Am I familiar with the Codex Sinaiticus? Yep. I've seen facsimiles of it. Yeah, it's neat. It's a Greek manuscript. It's big. I'm hoping to go to St. Catherine's at some point in the next little while. So next maybe 6 months, I'm hoping to go to St. Catherine's. So maybe I'll go to where it was. I've seen the new Craft movie, Kendra. Yeah, I've seen the new Craft movie, and you know what? There's always this thing to be like, there's a tendency of people to want to like measure something by something else, and sometimes things just stand alone. And I find that the second Craft movie wasn't great, in my opinion, but I feel like it updated itself in a really nice way. And I really appreciate the fact that they brought on practicing witches to inform the magic, right? To actually inform the magic. And so I really appreciate that, right? That they brought in people to make sure that it was representative of the communities that they were representing, which they don't have to do. They can, people can be super irresponsible. So I didn't like it a lot, but I feel like they were trying to do the right thing and trying, to do it well. I wish the soundtrack were better. I don't know. And like, it's great that David Duchovny's in it. Warm him up, bring him out. But yeah, I thought it was okay. But again, it has to live in the shadow of basically something that's impossible to really get at. Familiar with the work of Julius Evola? Yeah, I know a little bit about Evola's work, and I would do an episode on them. Of course, I mean, Evola is one of these characters that, because he was heavily associated with fascism and probably a fascist, at least for some period of time, that he gets, canceled, I guess. I don't know. So you can cancel people from the past. It's so silly. He's important. And it doesn't matter if you agree with him or you don't. I obviously don't agree with him and fascism generally. I hope that's obvious. But he's important, and his work deserves to need to be studied. And if you don't like an idea like fascism, which I don't, or nationalism, which I don't like, if you don't like those ideas, the best way to deal with them is by teaching them, by making it clear what they are, what they're about. And when people can look at them and say, yeah, this isn't mysterious or alluring, it's just bad and dangerous and hurtful, then people are more willing to rationally reject it. And I'd rather for people to rationally reject it because they look at the actual arguments than to be like, oh, that's canceled because that dude was a fascist. And I'm like, well, what's fascism? Well, it's like being mean. I'm like, no, it's not being mean. Fascism is a complicated historical phenomenon. And so if you're going to cancel it or whatever, you need to understand it. And so I have Mein Kampf right there. And so I think it's important, if we're going to be anti-fascist, which I would identify as an anti-fascist, that we understand it, and we can fight against it by making it clear what it is and talking about it and teaching it, being clear. Because when I teach political philosophy, fascism gets its day. So yeah, I think Evola is one of these characters that is controversial and dangerous, perhaps, but you're not going to deal with ideas that are dangerous and perhaps bad, right? You're not going to deal with those ideas by just burying your head in the sand and canceling people. Not going to be a thing. It's not going to work. It doesn't work. So I'm perfectly willing to explore all these ideas. I'm to explore them and to be honest about what I agree and don't agree with. Like I don't agree with religious nationalism or any of that kind of stuff. So I think that if the way we deal with stuff is by being honest and teaching it, not by just saying like, don't read books because you don't agree with them. That is a that's just a non-starter. I don't understand how anyone could think that is a good idea. Like, don't read books. That'll make it go away. That just seems silly to me. Fascism is not straightforward. It's more like a syndrome. It's not a political system. It's more like a syndrome. But that's a whole other question. Let's see. Let me scroll back up to see. Someone gave. Yeah, Devin, thanks so much for donating to the channel of Politics and Esotericism. William Blake obviously is one, as you mentioned, right? There is also like both right-wing political stuff that intersects famously with esotericism, but also there's left-wing stuff. People forget that Eliphas Levi was also himself a kind of left-wing dude. He was kind of a progressive social Catholic socialist of a certain kind. Also, there's Owenism. Owenism was also a kind of Christian mystical socialism that existed for quite some time. Marx had a lot of bad things to say about the Owenists. And again, also in the Middle Ages, right? There's no way of looking at the Brethren for the Free Spirit or Thomas Müntzer without thinking of them as both religious and sort of political figures at the same time. So yeah, absolutely. This is a case where I think these ideas are going in both directions. Again, also I mentioned earlier the Illuminati and Freemasonry. That Freemasonry has built into it a kind of idea that there is an equality among people. And that equality among people is founded on esoteric principles. And then those ideas got worked out in the public stage. And in some ways, many of the early Freemasons, especially in North America, to my understanding, were also activists pushing that agenda in the in the public sphere. So yeah, absolutely, Devin. There's a lot of intersections like that. Absolutely. Wow, Amy, thank you so much. That is an incredibly generous donation. I really appreciate that. And yeah, yep, you'll see it. The episode on Mormonism will eventually happen. Need to do a little bit more reading and get into a little more, but absolutely. Yeah, if you want to work together, if you have any resources that would be helpful, absolutely let me know. Get in touch with me via my website, and I would love to work on an episode on the intersection of Mormonism and Esotericism, which again I think is a really, really fascinating place. Let's see. What I think of Gnostic and Esoteric nods in David Lynch's films. Yeah, I think that's a super fascinating topic. I love David Lynch. I was on like a huge David Lynch fan for a long time, just like consuming everything he made with a friend of mine, Abby, back in the day, and when I was living in Memphis. And so yeah, I'd love to go back and look through those texts and think about those texts a bit more, or movies rather, because yeah, I think they do have sort of esoteric, Gnostic kind of elements in them, and so that would be interesting to mine those out. It'd be interesting to know if he's read that stuff, which he's kind of a genius, and I imagine he's read a bunch of stuff. So I'd be curious to know what's going in there consciously or subconsciously. What do I think about the Necronomicon? I think it's great fiction. I think it's great fiction. The Simon Necronomicon is a hilarious little book. I appreciate the work that went into it, and I appreciate the fact that it's sort of gotten its own life, especially in chaos magic and stuff like that. But I find it to be, if you know a lot about, I don't know, the Mockley ritual, for instance, right? Which I've done an episode about the Mockley ritual. If you know about the actual Mockley ritual and you look at the text, you're like, this is clearly a fraud or a made up text. And so it's kind of silly in that way, but it's just amazing that it had this huge impact. Eventually I'm going to make an episode about it. I'll make an episode about it because I think it is interesting as it's become important in the history of modern esotericism. Let me see here. Some other folks. So many great questions in here. Have I had any experiences that I would consider mystical? Yep, I have. I've had mystical experiences. I don't know if they've influenced me that much, but I would have. I've certainly had experiences, both doing traditional breathing techniques and meditation, but also on using the use of psychedelic drugs. I've had both of those kinds of experiences. I think they're very important. I think that. But at the end of the day, I don't know that they've made a huge impact on me. They haven't affected my metaphysical outlook on the world or anything like that. At least I don't think they have. You have to always be careful about what you think about yourself, because you're almost always wrong. I'm almost always wrong. Let's see. Wow. Wow, you tried the Sword of Moses for the bread and meat thing, and your mom brought you out an egg sandwich. Right. Great. That's fantastic. I wonder if your mom can use the Sword of Moses to get you to clean the dishes. That's the real question. Let's see here. Do I consider myself very religious? No, not very religious, but I am religious, and I take religion very seriously. My religion, other religions, but yeah, I wouldn't consider myself like Orthodox or anything like that. That's a lot of work. It's too much work. Wow. Wow, there's so many great questions. Thanks for the folks saying Shabbat Shalom. I appreciate that. Wow, there's so many great questions. What things have people gotten wrong about Aleister Crowley that is a shame in your mind? I think that the thing that at least from my knowledge of Aleister Crowley, I think the thing that people get the most wrong about him is the people that want to be him and imitate him. I think of all the things about Crowley that I admire, and Crowley's a complicated figure that I have a lot of complicated thoughts about, but he was a person who was willing to really carve his own path and really do the difficult spiritual work to figure out things for himself. And I find that there are people, and I've met some of these people, they're almost always young men, who try to imitate Aleister Crowley. And I find that I think he would just think that was terrible. I think he would be embarrassed of that. And so I think that like Crowleyanity is not what he had in mind. And so what I find that's interesting about Crowley is his maverickness, that he was willing to do all kinds of experimental stuff to figure out what worked. So I don't know. I don't like the idea of the people imitating him, because I often find that that those people who do that stuff are just become super cringy. And people who tend to ape other people just end up being cringy. And Crowley is just, and Crowley's just such a complicated character, and that what ends up happening is because he did these extreme things, people imitate those extreme things and not all the other stuff, all the other legwork, the legwork he did, like, I don't know, the legwork to learn Latin or whatever. He did all the other legwork, but they imitate just the more extreme stuff. And so you just get sort of like cringy, edgy people. And I find that that's just not what I think he had in mind. So I think that one of the things that I find that is silly about people who imitate, what I think Crowley would be most shocked by is people trying to be him. But I think he also, that would like pump up his pride. And he was a pretty what's the right word? Self-promoting dude. So self-promoting dude. Again, I think that it's okay to imitate people to some degree, because everyone's always imitating people to some degree. But I find that when that's your whole shtick, is that really a spirituality, or is that you just trying to like sort your identity out? Maybe it's both. I don't know. Not for me to judge. Jenny asks, would you consider conducting case studies on modern occult practitioner experiences? Yeah. One of the things I would be really interested in doing, that you mentioned it, one of the things I'd be really interested in doing is actually being on research panels, research groups that study paranormal phenomena. I personally am very skeptical of the existence of so-called paranormal phenomena, ghosts and things like that, possession, stuff like that. I'm pretty skeptical of it. But what I would like to do, because I have the weird background that I do, I would like to be on the panels of the people investigating that stuff. Because I think that writing it off as just always nonsense and always superstition or whatever, seems silly to me. That seems wrong. But I often find that the people doing that kind of research are people who already want to believe in it. And that, I think that to me, not poisons the well, but it makes me more skeptical. Because if you want to believe in find ghosts, then you'll find every weird thing in your EVP, or you'll find every weird thing that's a dust mite floating in a basement on a grainy digital image, and you'll take that to be a ghost, because you already want to believe in it, right? Caesar said that men gladly believe in the things that they hope for, and that's true, right? It's confirmation bias. And so I'd like to be on panels of people that do those kinds of things. I'd like to be on the panels of people that investigate possession cases or ghosts or hauntings or magical things that people can do or whatever. I'd really like to be on the panels of the kind of people that study that stuff, because I think that I could bring to those conversations, one, a skeptical attitude, but two, a sympathetic ear, where I'm both critical and sympathetic at the same time. So I'd like to be on the panels of people that do stuff like that. So I would absolutely be interested in being part of case studies like that. That sounds super fascinating to me. Super fascinating to me. I will do something on Giordano Bruno. Yep, absolutely. I definitely want to do an episode on his theory of magic. He has a very particular and weird theory of magic. His book De Magia is a really fascinating little essay, short book. So yeah, at some point I'm going to do an episode on his theory of magic. So Bruno is definitely in the works. Definitely in the works. Let's see here. Yeah, I mean, Kendra, I also I had a weird experience growing up too. With me, I think I saw a ghost when I was a kid. So yeah, I'm very interested in experiments, falsifiable experiments that could test some of this stuff. And there are interesting things out there, right? There's there's an article out that's, I think, from 2008, by the name slips my mind now, but he's a paranormal researcher, and he's published sort of what we know about psi phenomena. And it seems like that some of the phenomena are occurring greater than chance, which that needs to be investigated. That needs to be investigated. That kind of stuff absolutely needs to get investigated. Let's see. The most extensive Solomonic text, especially with astrological references. what is the most extensive Solomonic text? I mean, I think you would probably have to call a bunch of them together. I mean, I know that the recent book by Brian Johnson, the Necromancy in the Medici Library, that had that text, the necromancy text there is Solomonic in character, and there's an entire section that deals with astrological stuff there. So that's a great text. I think that most of the other stuff you would probably want to look in the works of Skinner. He's published a lot of these texts, and I think that you have to go looking through them and see if there's some stuff in there. But I think it's really culling from a lot of different sources to get a really. There's no single great Solomonic book. You'd really have to cull several different books together and kind of see which one makes the most sense for your interests. All right. Break down the physical illustration. Yeah, I did Cassian Blackburn. I did an entire 3-part series on the Monas Hieroglyphica, so you should check that out if you're interested in the Monas Hieroglyphica. I did a whole big analysis of it over a 3-part series. So yeah. Where do I buy all my books? I buy them wherever I can find them cheapest. If I can get them used, I get them used. I try to buy any sort of books that I know are published by small authors. I try to reach out to them and buy them directly from them. So, for instance, Aaron Leach, who I bought his books on Enochian stuff, I just bought them from him because I'd rather put money directly into his hands. These guys do not make much money. It's very important to please, if you have the resources, to pay for those books, not to just to pirate them, because those guys are not making a lot of money from those books. And I can tell you that people like Aaron and other kinds of people, Skinner, who are writing these books, both as practitioners and as scholars, are putting decades of work into those books, and putting some money into their hands is the right thing to do. So, so yeah, I try to buy them from where I can get them cheapest, and if I can buy them from the actual author, which I can typically get them signed and stuff, which is nice, I try to do that. Oh yeah, let me do my show and tell. Let me do my show and tell before I forget, because I'll get so interesting, and I'll get so interested in talking that I'll forget. All right, folks. So I did the episode on the Derveni Papyrus a couple of weeks ago, and one of the really interesting things about the Derveni Papyrus, right, is that it was burned. It was part of a funeral pyre, and miraculously, it survived being burned on a funeral pyre. Well, I was kind of curious what it would be to handle something like the Derveni Papyrus. So what did I do? I baked papyrus, right? I baked some papyrus. So this is a piece of papyrus. I actually have things written on it. I'll say some more about that in just a second. What I did was I wrote out a section of the Derveni Papyrus, right? I actually wrote out a section of it. In fact, I wrote up the section where Zeus swallows the phallus, because that's the greatest part. So I wrote out a part of where Zeus swallows the phallus on the inside, and I rolled it up, but I didn't seal it, right? I rolled it up, but I didn't seal it. And I put it in my toaster oven, as one is wont to do, and I baked it at 450 for about an hour until it was basically carbonized. It's carbonized now. You can see it's basically just a piece of carbonized papyrus. Of course, my partner comes home and is like, "What is that terrible smell in the house?" And I was like, "Well, I'm baking papyrus." And she was like, "Of course you are." I'm like, why are you? Yeah, of course you're baking papyrus. So what's interesting about this, folks, a couple things interesting about it. One is that if you're handling this, you can still see the letters. I can still see the letters. It's carbonized, but I can still see the letters. Secondly, I rolled it up pretty tightly, but I didn't seal it. And what did it do? It began to unroll because of the heat, right? As it heated up and as it carbonized, it unrolled, which tells me that the Derveni Papyrus was very likely sealed somehow when it was burned, right? That it was rolled up and then sealed with something to keep it intact. So I did this. So I've not messed with it since I did it, but I'm going to try to put this close to the camera and see if you guys can see it. But I know that the focus can be kind of weird, but look on the inside there. All right, you can see on the outside, that was another text I was writing from the Nag Hammadi library. But on the inside of the roll, I can get it close to the camera, maybe the camera focus. You bet you can see the letters, right? They're there. They're hard to read, of course, but you can see the letters, and you can certainly see them on the outside of the roll as well, where I was writing something else. This is a scrap piece of papyrus. So you can see the letters. Now, what's interesting, right, is if I try to unroll this any further, which I haven't tried to do, so I'm doing this live on camera, you can kind of see what immediately begins to happen. Let's see what happens as I try to unroll this. Yeah, it begins to crumble, right? Like it begins to immediately fall into pieces, just trying to unroll it. Because it's, again, just carbon. Whoops. It's just carbon. Now I have a fragment of the Derveni Papyrus, right? Now I have a fragment of the Derveni Papyrus. And you can see what they're dealing with, right? That's what they were dealing with. Imagine trying to decipher not just this, right? But let's take a, right? This would have been the puzzle that those guys would be putting together, right? Trying to sort this kind of thing out. And again, every time I move it, it just breaks. It just breaks. And so imagine having hundreds of fragments like this. And again, as I'm touching it, it's falling apart. Tons of fragments like that and having to put those back together. That's what those guys are dealing with, the scholars are dealing with when they're dealing with these burnt papyri. Whoops. Now my papyri is blowing all over the floor because of the fan. Here, let me get it off the floor again. Ugh. So at any rate, folks, what I find that's really interesting about this, it's still blowing around, is that it's still legible, and I wrote it in the exact same script as the original Derveni Papyrus. You can see a little, so I can get, if we come into focus, go into focus. Yeah, it's not going to go into focus. But you can see, maybe this fragment here will go into focus because it's a little bigger. There we go, almost. Maybe not, whatever. At any rate, this is the kind of stuff I'm really interested in doing. I'm interested in trying to reconstruct some of this, some of these things, because I find that it's interesting that I can learn about them in an abstract way by reading them in a book. But what's more fascinating to me is trying to think about what is it like to deal with this kind of stuff in real life. And I find that recreating some of these documents, recreating some of these texts, just gives me an insight into what I'm looking at. Now my hands are all covered with papyrus soot. Does anyone get to say that? Now my hands are covered in papyrus soot. Now they're covered in papyrus soot. But what's fascinating about this is that you just get to have these sort of experiments you can do. And what's fascinating about esotericism is, for me, is not just sort of the reading of it, but to looking at this material and trying to forensically think through what this was like, what these documents are like. So anyway, that's show and tell for today. Here, I can show you guys one more time. All right, just how this thing is just completely coming apart. Yep. Like I said, this is a scrap piece of papyrus, so it was willing to sacrifice it for the experiment. But again, like you can see, this is my own version of the Derveni papyrus. Yeah, I'm going to hide this on my walls, and someone's going to find it in like 100 years and be like, oh, God, I found an ancient book. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. I don't know. Maybe I'll give this away. Like, I'll give fragments of this away or something. Folks maybe want one if you want to donate money to the channel or whatever. And if you, I don't know, donate something money for the channel, I'll send you some fragments of my Derveni papyrus. At any rate, yeah, it's just funny things to, again, I think what's fascinating about this stuff, folks, is just that I like to approach it not just from this, read it in books, but at some level try to recreate it to some degree. So yeah, maybe I'll give away fragments of this to Patreon folks. So if you want to join Patreon and support the channel that way, what I'll do is I'll break this into some pieces and just send it to folks, and you can have your own little piece of my own Derveni papyrus, and you can claim that it's tens of days old, which it is. So where did I learn calligraphy? I taught myself. I've never taken a class on calligraphy. I've taught classes on calligraphy. In fact, I've taught a class called The Hidden Life of Letters, which is a class on, it's actually an introduction to paleography for art students. So art students who do design work, often design posters and stuff like that. And so they need to know something about the history of letters. And I teach a class, or I've taught a class called The Hidden Life of Letters. And it's a history of Latin paleography. And so it's all the technical stuff about how to read medieval books, but also how to write them. And so that's a cool class I've taught in the past. Taught that at Memphis College of Art, which has since closed down, sadly, which is going to hurt Memphis badly because there's a lot of cool freak people that used to go to that school, made awesome music, still make awesome music. And so closing that's going to be a mess. So yeah, I taught myself calligraphy, and I practice calligraphy still a good bit. In fact, I have a copy of something from the from a Valentinian gospel over there that I did. I can go grab it if people want to see it. It's a section from the Gospel of Truth that I did on papyrus. I didn't burn that one though. Let's see, other question, because I know that while I was doing show and tell, there had to have been some more questions coming. Let me see if there's some more. I'm going to be able to hang around for about an hour and a half today, so I get a little bit of extra time, thanks to my sister-in-law and mother-in-law who are looking after my kiddos. Yeah, baking papyrus. It did smell terrible. Now, it didn't smell as bad as like a burning body with papyrus, but just papyrus alone baking, not a good smell. I think the papyrus juice is it was kind of gross, kind of smelled bad. At any rate, now you got to look at burnt papyrus for 5 minutes on YouTube. Life is so weird. Life is so weird. Great. 23 is my interest in esoteric history. Or do I do research philosophy? Yes, I do some research in philosophy. Less so, more so these days, because I'm more interested in focusing on Esoterica as a project. But I am interested in Leibniz and his monadology and sort of thinking through that. Leibniz is a great philosopher. And so, yeah, I'm going to continue doing work in the channel on esotericism in philosophy. And of course, that's Hegel, Hegel, Leibniz, and other kinds of folks like that. So let's see. Would I quit teaching to do Esoterica full time if the financial support was there? Kind of. Kind of. Let me give that a fuller answer. I do envision transitioning to doing Esoterica full time once the financial support is there, and it's getting there actually, right? It's the financial support is getting there. Esoterica will become, I think, a full time thing. On the other hand, I really see that me teaching in the university is a public service. I like democracy at some level, and I think that our democracy in this country is threatened by lots of reasons. I think both elements on the right and the left are threatening our democracy. And I think that what stands between democracy and just mob rule is education. And insofar as I have a background in philosophy, I really do feel that it's my duty as a citizen of this country and as a citizen of where I live to contribute to students learning critical thinking skills, learning political philosophy, learning ethics. Like, I teach ethics to scientists at one of the places I teach. Of all the people that I really want to learn about ethics are scientists, because they could make all kinds of stuff, drones that kill us or whatever, Terminators. And so learning that can doesn't imply should is a really important thing. So do I want to do Esoterica full time? Yes, absolutely. And I intend to do Esoterica full time, especially once the financial support is there, when it's getting there. But I feel like it's my obligation as a citizen, and it's my obligation as a person who's benefited from access to that kind of education, that I should continue giving it. So even if I have to give that education at poverty wages, which is what I do now, I'm an adjunct professor, they pay me nothing. It's shocking how little I get paid. But it doesn't matter, because it's not about the pay. It's about the social duty. It's about the social obligation. So I don't want to give up teaching at the university completely. I think I just might shift my focus to doing Esoterica and think about teaching in the university as something I can do as a social obligation, which I think it is. Because I think it's not ethically good to have knowledge that can help society, even if in a very small way, and you don't contribute. And so I do want to continue contributing in that way, if that makes sense. Hope all that makes sense. Yeah, and also I teach in a public university here in Detroit. So there's a lot of like working class students. There is a lot of first generation students, which I'm a first generation college student. I grew up in the working class. I grew up very poor. And so I feel like it's my obligation and it's my privilege to work with folks who are first generation working class students, many from the Arab world, many Muslim students, many women students. And so doing that work doing that work is important to me, at least. So yes, both and. Any thoughts on Israel's new prime minister already receiving a pulse of Denora? I mean, what prime minister hasn't gotten a pulse of Denora, right? I mean, I think you can't be a prime minister or president of Israel without getting a pulse of Denora and going to prison. Whatever. All these pulse of Denoras. I have not talked to Earl Fontaine, the guy who does the Schwepp channel. He's awesome. That channel is the jam, folks. He does amazing work. I really appreciate his work, and I would love to work with him. Absolutely love to work with him. I don't know what we could work on, but it would be great to do some kind of crossover. I admire his work tremendously, and so it'd be all about working together with him. So if folks want to recommend that to him, if you know him or are in contact with him, absolutely, I would be interested and would be absolutely interested in working with him. That'd be great. Yeah, I appreciate folks understanding like why about teaching. It's a complete blessing that I get to teach. It's a complete blessing I have the education I have, and no blessing. What separates a blessing and a curse is how you use it sometimes. And I feel like if I don't use the education I have to make society at least better in the small ways I can, and to contribute to a society that's really made me have the opportunities I've had, that's something I don't feel good about that. So I'm looking forward to, I'm really happy to be a teacher, and I feel blessed to have the education I do. And I feel absolutely blessed that people spend the time to learn with me. And I always say with me, it's not from me, because I'm not the person here to give the answers. I'm the person here to provide an opportunity for us all to learn together. And I can promise you, I absolutely learn as much doing these episodes as you probably learn from them. So I'm totally stoked about learning with y'all, because I don't think learning is never a one-way street. Indoctrination is a one-way street, and I'll be damned if I'm in the business of doing indoctrination. Any time for that garbage. The New Thinking Aloud guy, I'd love to do an episode with him as well, Jeffrey Mishlove. He's a super fascinating guy, and if folks know him or know his channel or own his channel, reach out to him and tell him I'd love to do an episode with him. That would be great. I think he's a super smart guy, and I really like his work in the sort of paranormal investigation stuff. I'd absolutely love to do some of the stuff like that. Am I more analytic or continental? I do both because I do this thing called philosophy, which means you got to do both. And if you're not doing both, you're not really a philosopher. You're like you're a dogmatist or something. Folks might know that I graduated. I got my PhD from the University of Memphis. And part of the reason why I went to the University of Memphis is two reasons. One, it has one of the most diverse philosophy departments in the country, which is, I think diversity is always good for thought. The more diverse a room is, the less possibilities there are for it becoming an echo chamber. And secondly, I went to the University of Memphis, not because it's super prestigious or whatever, but I went there because it's the only one of the few departments that does both analytic and continental philosophy. And so I think it's important to do both. So I'm just at home with Sellers or Quine or whatever, as I am with Lacan or Deleuze. And I'm happy to move between both, right? Because I think that if you're only doing analytic philosophy, you're basically just doing applied logic. And if you're only doing continental philosophy, sometimes you're drifting into pretty unrigorous stuff, let's call it. And so I think that uniting those two things, analytic philosophy and continental philosophy, are incredibly important. And you'll see me, the episode I did on mysticism several weeks ago, that episode's really analytic. Right? It's a very analytic way of looking at mysticism. But I'll drop Lacan. Deleuze is someone who looms large in my mind. Lacan is someone who looms very large in my mind. Bataille also. So I really do both, and I feel like it's important for philosophers to be able to do both. And if you can't do both, I feel for you. I'm glad you helped with the dishes. Great. Good to hear. We should always definitely always help with the dishes. Let's see, question here. You still find it confusing? Yeah, I do too. Me and you both. Geometry of the... I have to look further and see exactly, because that's as the monist gets later on in there, especially Theorem 23, it gets super confusing. Shoot me an email. Shoot me an email from my website, and I'll try to point you to some other resources. What do I think about the holographic universe? I'm not smart enough to be able to evaluate that stuff. I don't have an education enough in physics. I like Sabine Hossendorfer, I think is her last name. She's a German physicist who has a great channel on YouTube called like Physics Without the Gobbledygook or Science Without Gobbledygook. I basically trust her. I find everything that she says to be just ingenious. I really find her take on physics to be super fascinating and really on point. So yeah, I'm really on team Sabine, which should be a thing, but I'm really on team her. And she has a pretty biting criticism of the holographic universe theory, which, again, I don't claim to understand that stuff. So I think she has a good read on it as much as I can understand it. The Shirokoma, yeah, I'll definitely do an episode on Shirokoma. That's the weirdest book ever written, or one of the weirdest books ever written. So yeah, absolutely, we'll be doing an episode on Shirokoma. Yeah, folks, if you're interested in me working with the folks with New Thinking Aloud, I'd love that. That'd be great. So just mention it. On JRE, the Joe Rogan Experience. I don't think Joe has much time for little folks like me. I'm just a little guy. So I don't know. Maybe esotericism would be up his alley, and maybe it would introduce people to the wider world of esoteric stuff. People, people on some level dismiss people like Joe Rogan, and I did. I was one of these people. My brother made it really clear to me. He made a very good argument. It's like, look, Joe Rogan reaches more people than CNN does. So you got to take him seriously, even if you don't take him seriously. And I think that has to be right. That has to be right. Let's see here. Would you ever do a video which just introduces the Neoplatonic metaphysics? Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, I would. And the part of the reason why I haven't done it yet is straightforwardly this. It's very intimidating because there isn't just one Neoplatonic metaphysics, and trying to parse one out is going to make someone angry, right? The metaphysics that Proclus uses, the metaphysics that Plotinus uses, and even rewinding that back to the Middle Platonists, which I think the Middle Platonists are more important in this whole story than anyone wants to admit, for maybe except for John Dillon or whatever. But I really would like to do an episode on Middle Platonism, because I think that Middle Platonism is actually far more important in this story than people think. For instance, Hermeticism and stuff is unimaginable without Middle Platonism. It existed prior to Neoplatonism. So yeah, I would like to continue doing those episodes. Just need to get the time to read that stuff and make those episodes. But like I said, that material is so intimidating. But yeah, absolutely need to get those episodes done. Yeah, I think that's super important. Yeah, I would like to do an episode on Bataille's theory of mysticism and his theory of religion, which is really, really interesting and important. So at some point, I will eventually get to Bataille. Hey, Lana, aloha. Did you get your second poke? I hope it goes well. The second one for me was also like kind of an ordeal, but I hope you're doing okay. Yep, Bataille. I will definitely do Bataille. I see all my Bataille books right there. So Bataille, I will get back into some Bataille at some point. Soon. Yeah, I would love to do something on magic and religious rituals. I mean, not magic, music and religious rituals. I don't understand much about music because it's so complicated. There's this channel I like on YouTube that it's I think her name is Ixie. She does musical analysis of Nine Inch Nails songs, and they're incredible. I've learned more about music theory from watching her episodes on the musical analysis of Nine Inch Nails songs than I have anything else. And so yeah, maybe I can bring an expert on who's an expert in music to do some of those stuff. So yeah, I would I'd like to do that. Let's see here. How are we doing on time? I got 10 minutes left. UAPs as a religious phenomena. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I've seen pretty good videos that explain those aerial phenomena pretty well. That basically they're just optical illusions or things caused by the FLIR and things like that. So I'm not really convinced that these are the recent UAPs that have been filmed are in fact extraterrestrials. I think that there's other explanations that are far more convincing, to me at least. Yep, we'll do something on Shabbatites V, on the Frankists. I really would like to do an episode on not just Shabbatites V, because I think that there's some good stuff out there already, but more of his theology. I'd love to do some episodes on his theology and how his theology worked, especially this document called The Trees and the Dragons, which is an incredibly weird Kabbalistic analysis of Shabbatites' messianic claims. So, yeah, I will definitely be taking a look at... we'll be taking a look at that. Yeah, and they definitely saw them with their own eyes, and they've taped them. But again, there's good evidence, there's good reason to believe. Let me see if I can pull this channel up that basically debunks a lot of the more extreme claims, made by the folks about the UAP stuff. Let me see here. Yeah, this is a really great episode. If folks want to check a look at about the UAPs, just sort of taking a look and trying to again, analyze them from a more rational perspective or whatever. Yeah, absolutely. I think Nathan of Gaza to me is far more interesting than Shabbatai. Shabbatai was just sort of along for the ride to some level. He wasn't a theoretician. Shabbatai, I think, was rather Nathan of Gaza was the real mind behind the Shabbatian movement. And so I'm far more interested in Nathan of Gaza than I am Shabbatites V. And the influence that Nathan of Gaza's texts have had is enormous. So I'm often much more interested in him and his writings than I am in Shabbatai himself. So Shabbatai gets all the credit, but Nathan of Gaza was the brains behind whatever. I don't know what the right metaphor is. Yeah, he was the dude. So yeah, I think he doesn't get nearly enough credit than he deserves. I'd like to see a working golem. I would too. Yeah, I would love to see a working golem. I don't know. Yeah. Making golems seems hard though. You gotta there's a lot of work that goes into making those golems, and the story never seems to go well. Very rarely do you see stories in history where people said, yeah, and I built a golem and everything was fine. Yeah, I don't, but yeah, it seems like a lot of work. I had to pick one esoteric philosophy to live my life by. Which one would I pick? I don't know. I can't answer a question like that. I can say that the people who are practicing Hermeticists are the people that I really respect the most often. I often find them to be some of these are people who are reconstructing Hermeticism. And I'm thinking of people like my friend and colleague, Eric Arneson and Polyphanes, Sam Block. They're just some of the most thoughtful thinkers and doers. And I find that the way that they relate to the world as Hermeticists, just really elegant and beautiful. So I'm not saying that Hermeticism or whatever is the ideal thing or whatever. I want to say that the people I've met who live their life as Hermeticists have always struck me as just really thoughtful, caring, deep thinking people. Yeah, the modern Hermeticist is a great guy. Dan Trail's an awesome dude. I'm going to have him on to the live stream at some point soon so we can hang out and talk stuff. So yeah, I think Hermeticism is a pretty interesting way of relating to the world, and it gives an interesting way of thinking about God and nature, and there's something positive, unlike Gnosticism, about human beings and Hermeticism, at least at some level. So, and things like that. But I don't know. I've also met Wiccans and Thelemites who are amazing people. So it's not for me to judge. It's one of these things where I've definitely had all kinds of garbage, trash people who belong to my religion, right? Idiot religious nationalists who are just racist bastards. And I've also met some of the most wonderful people in my tradition. I think every tradition's like that. The question about frightening demon in a box fictional story, I don't think so. The Dybbuk box, this is a thing that people talk. I've seen. There's a movie about this, and there's like all kinds of YouTube videos. Dybbuks can't live inside boxes. If you read the literature about Dybbuks, as much as there are Dybbuks, if you read the literature about Dybbuks and you read the accounts of Dybbuks, they talk about how they have to be inside of someone, and that it's agony for them to be outside, and that they even hop into animals. There's a great story where this Dybbuk possesses a woman, and he said he was originally he was at one point inside of a deer who was pregnant, and it was terrible. Like, it was terrible to be inside this pregnant deer. So I don't understand. One, I don't know how Dybbuks work, but two, what little I do know about Dybbuks is that they can't be put in boxes. So I don't know. I think that that's more like the genie in the bottle story from 1001 Arabian Nights, and it is an authentic story from Jewish mysticism. I don't know of any historical accounts that have genies in boxes. I think that's more from Pandora or stuff like that than it is from Jewish mysticism, generally speaking. All right. Are Satanists in general good people? I've met a lot of good people from the Temple of Satan, actually, here in town. Actually, I really do appreciate that their commitment to freedom of speech and freedom of religion and freedom from religion, which is also an important part of that. So I've met the folks I've met are deeply thoughtful, critical thinking people who really care about civil society, and God knows we need more of those people. So I again, like. I often find that the folks I've met, at least from the folks I've met, and there are folks in the room who identify as Satanists, I've always found them to be super thoughtful people. But again, like, there's so much stereotyping and stuff that goes into that, that just, it's just unfortunate that people get tossed into that and get made fun of or mocked or judged by how they look or the name of their religion or whatever. Like, it's unfortunate and dreadful. Unfortunate and dreadful. Yeah, okay, yeah, sure. There's the Order of Nine Angles and stuff like that. Those people are trash. Yeah, there's all kinds of trash people in the world. But trust me, as much as there are the trash people in the Order of Nine Angles, right, or whatever, like, yeah, those are evil people. But trust me, there are more evil people that are just like regular old Jews and Protestants, and there are like millions of them out there. The number of like racists or fascist believers in Asatru or Satanism or whatever, those are a tiny group of people. And focusing on just those people paints the entire religion in a completely unfair way. And it doesn't represent the fact that there are horrifying people in the big religions, right? Like, horrifying people in all the big religions. Like, I can pick on my religion. Like, religious nationalists are terrifying. And so the idea that somehow Satanists or Asatru people, because there are some bad eggs or whatever in there, that you can paint the whole religion with a broad brush, that's completely ridiculous. There are crap people, trash people that believe in evil versions of their religion in every damn religion, including secularism. And so they're there. So yeah, I'm and painting with a broad brush like that just strikes me as intellectually lazy. Just saying. Just saying. All right. A couple more questions here. We're coming down to the end of the time I have for the live stream, but so great to be able to hang out with you guys. I really just like find myself, I started this channel, I had no idea what it would do. And just like the fact that I get to sit around on a Friday afternoon and hang out with super smart people and chat with you guys, man, it's just like such a blessing. I'm just absolutely lucky to be able to do this. Varg is like, it's like one of these people, like a lot of people that just like, he's a bad person, I think, basically. Makes great music, but not so great of a person. I wish I could hang out with him and like try to just, be like, hey man, like, do you really believe those things about me? Like, come on. Like, I'm like, let's try to sit across the table and sort out how you got to these kind of positions, and do you really believe the stuff about me? At least I don't know. I feel like by having hard conversations, we do a whole lot better than just being like, you're a bad person, we write you off. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, even the mean Buddhists that are like, mean Buddhists that are like hurting the people in Rohingya. It's like, fuck, man, Buddhist fundamentalism, God, That stuff scares me. All that fundamentalism stuff scares me. All right, let's see here, folks. I'm coming down to the end. I'm not sure if I'll have time for, whoa, it focused in a weird way. All right, folks. Well, let me say this. I just want to reiterate a couple last things. One, just really appreciate folks who donated to the channel. Really appreciate folks who support the channel through Patreon, who support the channel through sharing the content, who comment. Every part of what you guys do to contribute to make this channel possible is something that I don't take for granted, and I'm humbled and thankful for everything. Whether it's just thumbs up, liking stuff, sharing it on Twitter, sharing on Facebook, supporting financially, whatever. All of that stuff just it makes this whole project possible. And I'll say that this is a project close to my heart. I think it's important. I think that having this this information be accessible and not the purview of secret people who use it to get power or manipulate people or whatever, that it's out there. That it's out there. It's out there in an approachable, digestible, accessible form, and that anyone can access it. As long as you have an internet connection and YouTube, you can get it for free. And I always want to make sure that my content is for free. That this is never an ivory tower speaking completely over your head, using a bunch of completely ununderstandable stuff on which I get to hold the secrets and you have to come to me as the master or whatever. None of that, right? And it's free of conspiracy theories and at least as much as I can limit my own biases, as much as anyone can do that, right? I want to do that. So I really appreciate the trust that you guys put in me to make this possible, whether that's sharing the content or whatever, supporting it financially through crypto or through PayPal or whatever, and through Patreon. It's just it humbles me, and I'm blessed for it. So thank you guys for hanging out with me this afternoon. I'm gonna do some more live streams here in a couple weeks probably, and again, just I hope you guys take care of yourself. I hope you're doing well, staying sane out there. I hope you're able to get out into the world a little bit more. And yeah, I appreciate you guys so much. Thank you. All right, for folks out there who observe the Sabbath, I hope you have a great Sabbath. I hope it's a Sabbath of rest and peace. I hope everyone has a day of rest and peace, no matter what religion or non-religion you believe in. And hope everyone just has a great afternoon. Take a look at this week's episode on demons in ancient Israel. And next week, folks, we are getting into some Enochiana. So hopefully the angels will be with me. So again, thank you all so much for joining me today on the live stream. Thank you for the Father's Day wish. I wish everyone a good Shabbos, a Shabbat Shalom, and yeah, take care of yourself. Thank you guys all so much.